Hello guys, and welcome. We are very excited to join you here for the first Bintray webinar. My name is Baruch Sabagursky, and I'm a developer advocate with JFrog, and with me here is the actual speaker of this webinar, Yoav Landman, the CTO of JFrog, and the roadmapper and architect of Bintray. This is what we have on the agenda today. We are going to do a little bit of housekeeping, and then we will talk about the benefits of you being here, what the continuous distribution term is, what are the requirements for building a download center of your own. We are going to show you Bintray naturally. We are going to talk a little bit about the architecture of Bintray, so you will be sure that Bintray is a reliable and blazing fast service. And then, of course, we will show you a demo of how you can create your own organizational corporate download center in 10 minutes. With that, I'm very honored to invite Yoav to take it further and talk about Bintray.
Hi, everyone. So the things we want you to take with you from this webinar are to be able to automate your software distribution easily. It's not always an easy task, and especially getting your files onto a CDN. Those of you who had the experience of working with CDN vendors may know how complicated it can be sometimes to integrate a solution for binary distribution with the CDN provider. To get insights from your download center about how your software is consumed and by whom, and of course to manage entitlement and basically control who consumes and who can get your software. So a little bit of a forward about continuous distribution. So we are all familiar with the concept of continuous integration. So as JFrog, we are the makers of Artifactory, and Artifactory is a binary repository. So we are very well integrated into the continuous integration space for several years now. And the role of Artifactory in the continuous integration phase is it acts like a smart warehouse for your binaries until they mature over the different QA phases. Right, so you put your binaries in different repositories depending on the level of their maturity, and then you come to the next step, which is the delivery phase. So the natural delivery phase, the continuous delivery movement, is mostly about, we mostly speak about continuous deployment. And then we have tools like Chef, Puppet, Docker that takes your software and provision it to the runtime. So basically you can say that you are the one running your software when you are dealing with continuous delivery. And what we are talking about in this webinar is the second half of continuous delivery. So it's not the continuous deployment, but it's the continuous distribution. And the continuous distribution, which I'm going to cover with regards to Bintray, is the fact that you take your software and you basically push your software to end users. So the push can be to devices, it can be a firmware update, it can be any operating system update that happens. It can be a software that somebody installs on the machine. It can be a package that is installed by a package manager and so on. But at the end of the day, you have to go out to the cloud or to your internal cloud and distribute your software to your end users, because you're not going to be the one running it. So this is where Bintray comes to place, and this is where the whole concept of a download center that doesn't necessarily have to be a server from which people are downloading installable software, but it can be any distribution server that you set up. This is where it comes to play. So moving forward, when you set up a download center, let's look at the typical requirements that you have to look at. So the first thing is like Baruch mentioned, you want blazing fast downloads. You want everything to be super fast, and you want also, because your download center is the face, the interface with your customers, then you want to have a great uptime. Of course, you want it to be secured. You want it to be able. You want to be able to manage entitlements and track usage and get real-time stats and have searchable metadata that you can put on your software and do smart things with. And the other thing is you want it to be fully automatable. So you want to make sure that you can automate the process with your CI processes. You want to tie up, which is something, if you think about it, it's something quite new to tie up your CI process and the whole chain, which normally stops at continuous delivery, to tie it up to the continuous distribution phase. So people are doing it, but they may come up with their own solution. But for a download center, you need it to be automatable in order to be able to do that. And of course, you want to have the smartness in your download center to be able to serve packages, smart packages such as RPM, Debians, Docker images, etc. And from a company perspective, so we covered the speed and uptime, but there is also a lot of a critical place for usability. Again, it's your interface with customers, so a download center that doesn't offer usability is, of course, going to have a negative effect on how customers perceive your company. And one thing that people tend to forget is that the infrastructure or the way that your download center is built has to be flexible enough to accommodate changes. And while it's core for your business needs, it's normally a side project, so it's not your core business to build a download center in most enterprises. And if we look at the typical way of building and adopting a download center, which many companies have, is that usually there is some kind of abandoning phase for investing in such a product, in such an internal tool. So what we saw with a lot of customers, and this is one of the prime reasons why we decided to go on and build Bintray, is that usually when people build a download center, there are very big plans around it, and it starts with a great enthusiasm. But after some time, there is an infrastructure freeze, again, because it's not core for the business. And then the resources that can handle the download center are becoming minimal. What we saw is that oftentimes it becomes really a domain of one person. If you want to get something on the internet on the download center, you can do it, but you have to wait for this guy to tweak something in the database or to edit an XML file that will make it automatically pop up in the UI of the download center. And it sounds like it sounds a bit unreal, but this is, from our experience, the reality in a lot of places. And again, because you have very little automation, then so it's okay if you release once in a couple of weeks or so, but if you have many updates, many patches, many new revisions or moving revisions like continuous integration and continuous delivery often mandate, then it's becoming really hard to have a download center that is maintainable. So, like I said, this is one of the prime reasons why we created Bintray, and Bintray is a cloud distribution as a service. It's basically an infrastructure to build a download center. So we released Bintray at the beginning of 2013 as pure open source initiative, and we made it commercial just towards the end of last year. On Bintray, we have users such as the Netflix open source project, Homebrew, the installer for Mac, Vagrant, and all the HashiCorp artifacts are distributed through Bintray. Every Android developer that needs libraries for building Android software is getting them through Bintray. The Apache Foundation is using Bintray Debian packages to distribute software like Cassandra. ThoughtWorks are distributing Go through Bintray. Spring and Gradleware, they all have a full release cycle of distributing their software through Bintray. So the advantage of Bintray is having a full life cycle from development to distribution, and that's done using the REST API and automation features that are built into Bintray. You can distribute any file. So I mentioned Debian, RPM, Maven, and we have a new edition that we're going to announce today. And you have, of course, powerful access control. Everything is backed up by a CDN. So we integrate out of the box with CloudFront and Akamai. So the high-end users, they can get the CDN on Akamai. And we track usage and give you advanced statistics, almost real-time statistics. And we'll see some of it in the demo. And I mentioned a new player in Bintray. So Bintray now supports Docker repositories. Since today, if you go to the website, you will see that we have Docker just from maybe 2 hours ago. We opened the flag. So basically, you can get open source Docker repositories on Bintray with no limits, and for private repositories, you need the Bintray commercial. So that's new. So to summarize, we are providing a complete, fast, and reliable download center infrastructure through Bintray. And I mentioned all the open source projects and all the big clients that we're having. So apart from the commercial customers that are on Bintray, we have those big open source players, and for them, they stress Bintray more than any commercial customer today already can stress Bintray. Part of our core focus in Bintray and when building Bintray is having a really fanatic uptime. So you can see this diagram, which is a very 10,000 feet high view of architecture. And we have data centers globally in Europe and in the United States, and all the deployment in those data centers is based on clusters. So all the services that we deploy are clusterable, and there is special focus on keeping the download part of Bintray always available. So coming from years of distributing binaries, we know how painful it can be when you cannot download your software. So while things like the stats may be frozen for a couple of minutes or the UI may be down for a couple of minutes, there is zero tolerance for downloads. So if you cannot download, if you cannot provision software to your end users, that's for us unacceptable. And this is why we invested a lot in the download infrastructure. Part of it is backed up by our own clusters, and part of it is backed up by using the CDN facilities. And from that, we're going to go directly to the demo, and just to give you a little bit of idea what we're going to see. So I'm going to show you a set of products in the Bintray UI under the JFrog user. And for those products, I'm going to show you how to upload to Bintray through the REST API, including integration with Artifactory for doing the upload. And then we're going to fire up a very small web UI that we created for our imaginary download center. And we're going to use a feature in Bintray called signed URLs, which allows you basically to hand off URLs to anonymous users for downloads and do tracking for those seemingly anonymous users. So we will see it in the demo, and it will make more sense, I think. And then I'm going to show you a little bit of the stats and alerting features of Bintray And so I'm going to share my screen and let's start. I went to the Bintray website, so it's bintray.com, and what I did is I went into the JFrog account. So in Bintray, the layout is that you have accounts that can be organizations or users. So this is the JFrog organization with our built-in teams and our repositories. So I'm going to click the view all to see all the repositories in here. Okay. And for this demo, we created 3 repositories: a Debian repository, so download center example, which is a Debian repo, a generic repo that can take any file, and an RPM repo that typically takes RPMs. You can put any file in any repository, but the thing is that if you use Debian or RPM or special typed repository, Maven or Docker now, it's going to generate the metadata on the fly for you, and I'm going to show you an example of that. So I'm going to go and drill down into the generic repository. And inside the repository, I have logical packages. So a repository basically is just a place where people download from, but I can have logical packages inside the repository. So we created a generic package. And in this generic package, I already have some versions and basically some files. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to wipe out this package completely. I'm going to remove it, and I'm going to recreate it. I deleted it. Okay. So there is no package now, right? So I'm just inside the JFrog user in a generic repository, and now I have to upload files to the repository. So typically the upload is done with metadata of packages. So I'm going to do the upload now. I'm going to go to my snippets, and I'm going to just echo something. So clean up a little bit. Okay. So I just created a temp file, and I'm going to use the Bintray REST API to do the upload, and then piping the output to JQ just to get a nicer JSON response. So this will fail, okay? It will fail because the package is not there. Okay, so I'm unable to find requested package, name generic, and you can see in the URL I'm basically uploading to a generic package, to version 09, and then the full path in the repository of my document, of my artifact. So to do that, I need to create the package. I don't have to do it manually, but I'm going to do it manually. Everything I'm doing, of course, is backed up by the Bintray REST API, and I'll show you a more advanced usage in a second. So I'm going to type generic, completely no additional information in here. If this was a free open source package, then I would have to also specify a license and also the URL of the version control. But since it's a premium repository, which is a paid for repository, I don't have to enter this information now. So I'll just create a package. And I created a generic package, and I'm going to attempt to repeat the upload. Okay, so now it's good. And now I can go back to my package, generic. Okay, and I have this message that tells me I have uploads in my repository. I have files which are unpublished, and I need to think whether or not I want to publish them or not. So it's like a pre-validation phase, which is purely optional. I could have put on my upload request query, I could have added publish equals 1 in order to skip this phase. And if I go to the files view, I can see this terms.txt that I just uploaded, and it has a small dot on it, meaning it's unpublished. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to publish the file. That's it. Okay, so now the file is published. Everyone can download it. And if I download it from here, it offers me a download feature, a download pop-up. So what I want to show you now is a little bit of more automation. So the API of Bintray is we have a huge REST API, but I'm going, instead of using the REST API directly, which can automate everything for you, creating the package with all the metadata and so on, I'm going to use the integration with Artifactory to push things to Bintray. So this is the UI of Artifactory. Some of you may know it, and let's wait for it. Okay, came back. Okay, so this is a cloud version of Artifactory, and we created a repository we named Amphibian, to which we uploaded a DMG file, which is a 16 meg file, and Bintray info.json file. Let's look at the JSON file. So basically, this Bintray info.json is metadata. It's a metadata descriptor to a package and to an upload in Bintray. And you can see it specifies the information about the package, including a description, some labels, whether or not I want to make my, so that's more of an open source feature, whether or not I want to make my download numbers public to users and have my stats public. And I have version information, so I'm uploading to version 1.0 with the description for this version, and I have the flag that says publish equals true. And in Artifactory, I have a fairly new REST API that allows me to take my either this build info.json that exists in just in any place in a repository, or it can be part of a build. So I can either push a build or push a directory. So when I have the build info.json, it's going to push everything adjacent, any sibling and any sibling file and any sub directories underneath. And I'm going to use this REST API now against Artifactory Online to do the push to Bintray. So just run that. And just notice that in the JSON file we had, so it's successful, we had the version which was version 1.0, not 0.9. So now I'm going to go back to Bintray. I'm going to select the generic package again. And I can see, so this is the package level. I see a unified view for all the versions. And if I go to the files view, I can see the layout inside the repository. So I have the doc where I published my terms.txt before, and if I go back and I can see that I have the new file just uploaded from Artifactory. And what's also interesting is that all of a sudden I have a description for the package, and I have the labels, and I have in the general section all the metadata for the package that I uploaded from Artifactory. So this is just the metadata view in the UI. For the tooling, it looks like a very, very dumb repository. So it basically will look like the information that we just saw in the Files tab. So this is the download server. You can see that the domain has changed, and this is a totally different infrastructure. And files were automatically synced up to this to our download servers. And here they are laid out as regular files in a very simple not flat, but very simple layout. So all the metadata is being used by the REST API and in the Bintray UI, but at the end of the day, your tools are connecting to Bintray and interfacing with Bintray for doing the downloads and consuming software using plain generic paths that you put in your URL. So this is how it works with all the tools. Okay, so we uploaded from Artifactory, and now let's create a download center from this. So there isn't much here. There are other two repositories. So this is the generic repo, and let's go just for a second to the Debian repo. Just I want to show you the metadata. So we have a Debian repo. It has a Debian package in it that we created. It could be a real package like MySQL, for example. And here, under the files, I have a Debian file. And the metadata is not shown in the UI, the generic metadata, which is pure technical metadata that normally doesn't interest somebody inspecting the package. But if I go to the repository URL directly, you can see how it's laid out, where you have the pool with the actual Debian image, and then you have, going back, you have the disk with all the typical Debian metadata, the release file, the packages file, which is auto-generated by Bintray. So we allow you also to do signing on Bintray. You can either sign with the Bintray key pair, it is of course stored in Bintray, or you can use signing through the REST API. It's up to you. So let's leave that, and let's go to the interesting phase. We want to build a download center. This is why we're here for. Okay. So what we did is we created a very small Node.js application running on Express. So you can see the application. It's pretty simple. And I'm going to show you what we did in this application. The code itself took, including the web interface, so two guys. One is a UI expert, and one is a good developer, but someone who didn't even know anything about Node.js before. It took them around a day to come up with this demo. And let's go to the code for a little bit. So, okay, so this is where the real brain of the application happens. We call a Bintray REST API that is called signed URLs, and I want to speak a little bit about signed URLs. So I'm going to go to the Bintray REST API documentation. I'm already placed in the URL signing section. So what we do with URL signing is we allow you to take a path, a file under a repository, and basically create an encrypted URL that you can hand off to anyone. This URL would have an optional expiry, so it's only good for a certain amount of time. It has a callback ID, which is your own way. It's your applicative identifier for a user, so that you can track the actual user. So you can put here your username that comes from your domain, an optional callback email to send emails, notifications on downloads, an optional callback URL and method to send a webhook notification. And once you give someone this URL, it's going to be so it's an encrypted URL. It cannot be forged. And from this URL, when somebody uses this URL, it's going to generate events which we record. So at the minimum, it will go into the logs, and a Bintray user can download the logs through the UI or through the REST API, and I'll show you. And you can also get an immediate insight through the notifications, the email or the URL. So let's see that. So I'm going back to the code. So this is where we call the sign URL. The code is on GitHub, by the way, and we will publish the link at the end of the seminar if you want to take a look. Just don't use it as a platform to learn Node.js, because, like I said, the one who did it, it was his first Node.js project, but we did it kind of on purpose. We wanted to have a greenfield download center and see what it takes a guy that just consults the REST API build it. And part of the configuration, you can see that we are going to the JFrog repository. This is a callback email, which I will show you. We'll use to show you the emails that we're getting, and we're using the request bin service just to easily get debugging for webhooks. And let's fire up this small project. So I'm going to do node up. So there it is. It started on port 3000. I will use a different browser. So I'm going to Chrome. So it's an anonymous Chrome window just to get rid of any caching effects. And we have just a logging screen to a made-up company called Amphibian Software. And let me log in. So, okay. So once I logged in, I have a generated page. And what we did is we generated download links for 3 imaginary products, an RPM, a Debian package, and almost a Docker image. The thing is in here, the downloads are just plain links to file. We're not going to use any tooling to do the download. And I want to show you just one more thing before I'm attempting to do the download, is that, it's in here, is that when we generated those 3 links in the application, we gave a timeout of 60 seconds to the 3rd one. So let's go back to the application, and let's try and download it. I'm clicking it a couple of times. Download this. So it takes a couple of minutes to sync up to the CDN. So sometimes when you upload, it can take a minute or 2 before it actually is available on the CDN. And here I clicked the 3rd link, and I got a URL expired error message. And if I go back, I'm going to re-log in. So I'm clicking napkins, and I'm going to use a different name. Sign up as myself, And if I click the link now, oops, so it's a browser caching. Let me just do a complete incognito from the beginning. Okay, so now it's downloading. If I try it again in 60 seconds or so, the link will not be available anymore. I think the default, if I remember correctly, if you don't specify anything, those links as well, if you don't specify an expiry, they will expire in 24 hours. But of course, you can generate a link that is good for virtually forever. And let's look now at what it means to use those signed URLs. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my email account. Okay, so sometimes of course it's asynchronous. We don't overload the download process with any extra processing that it doesn't have to take. So it may take a minute like it took here. And we can see the download event, so downloaded and from which address and so on. So this one is the Debian, this one is the RPM. And we can also go to the request bin UI, and let's refresh it. Yeah, it's 1 minute ago. And you can see the callback from Bintray. So it's a signed callback, so it cannot be forged. It has a signed, it's using your API key to sign the message. And it gives you information about what was downloaded, from where, and so on. If I go back to the Bintray UI, so that's using the signed URL for the user, the URL, just maybe I should show that. Okay, so it's using plain JavaScript, but for the user, the URL for downloading is completely opaque. It's a bunch of encrypted strings, and he cannot really tell what information is encumbered in the URL. And this information is encrypted and extracted after on the Bintray server to gather those statistics. If I go back to the Bintray UI, and I can go back to the stats, so you can see that we are getting almost real-time statistics for those downloads. So some of those I did earlier, but the statistics that you get here are almost immediate. And it's not very impressive to see it for just a single download that was created just now. So I will show you in a minute a more full statistics. Another thing you can do is you can download the log files. It takes log files 24 hours to show up here because we roll them every 24 hours. In the next coming weeks, we will introduce a new Bintray feature that allows you to basically tail the downloads with extra information, which I'll explain a little bit in a moment. Let's go to the Artifactory package. So that's the Artifactory. This is the Artifactory package from Bintray, and we basically eat our own dog food, and the Artifactory itself is distributed through Bintray since not so long ago. So this is the open source, but we also use signed URLs to distribute Artifactory from the web store of JFrog. And let's look at the statistics for a second. Okay, so you can see so our stats are open for the open source, and you can see the statistics broken down by versions and so on. And you can go and see differences between different versions across time. You can get this spotting. This is very much useful. So one of the common feedback, especially by the way for open source projects, is that people want to know whether or not the software is really popular. The fact that you get a lot of downloads from China, for example, doesn't always say that your software is indeed popular. And if I click the download here, so I get a list of downloads of daily download log. I'm not going to open them because I don't want to reveal customer IPs. And if I go, I have a sample one that we scrubbed the IPs from. So it's just a regular Apache Commons format for the logging. What we are going to come up with is we are going to give you this information in Excel format, in CSV, with lots more data, including the reverse DNS lookups of IPs and the who-is organization and so on. So that's coming in a couple of weeks. It's basically in very heavy stages of development. So I think this is pretty much. I think this pretty much covers our demo for today. If you have any questions, then we'll be very happy to take them. Baruch?
Yeah. So we have a number of interesting questions here, and hopefully we will have time to answer them all. So let's start with the first one. You spoke about specific file type support for Debian, for Docker, RPM. What are the other types? What if I want to upload, let's say, a zip file? Will it work?
Yeah, for sure. So Bintray supports basically the support for special packages is just about generating the metadata that the tooling that is using those special format repositories expects to find in the repository. So to upload any generic file, like we saw in the demo, is supported, of course, and yeah.
Yep. Okay. And here is another one. As I understood, Bintray has both free and paid accounts. What is the difference between the two?
Okay. So instead of me answering, it's easier to go to the pricing page. So the biggest difference between the paid account and the open source version of Bintray, which is unlimited as well, is that in the open source you really have to distribute open source software. And for that you have to do two things, is specify an open source license and put the VCS URL on your packages, and that's it. There is a bigger difference between, so there are other small features such as the APIs are metered for the open source usage, and of course you cannot have private repositories in the open source, otherwise it wouldn't be open source. And yeah, so this is the big difference. There is also a difference from the regular commercial Bintray Premium and the enterprise one, and it's mainly around Akamai and bundling with Artifactory. So for enterprise accounts, we use Akamai.
Okay. And here is another question. From the topology diagram, it seems that you have 2 data centers in the United States and in Europe. Can I select when my package will be stored?
So that's an interesting question. Basically, if you only use signed URLs, initially the artifacts are stored in the United States. If you want to have control over who consumes them and you're using signed URLs, then you can, because it's a CDN-based thing, then you can, when using the CDN and you're using signed URL to make sure that only people you gave the link to can download it, then if you go through the CDN edges that are closer to you, the file will not be propagated unless somebody with permissions to download it was requesting it. So it's kind of a way to enforce the distribution of your file. But at the end of the day, everything is on a CDN, right? So you're going to have a download which is super fast from the nearest edge location to you.
That's a big deal. It's much more than only Europe and United States. You will get it from next door because of the CDN anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and here's a question that we hear a lot. We are working with Artifactory. Why do we need Bintray? Looks like they both are suitable for distribution.
So yeah, well, at the base of it, you can use Artifactory for distribution, like you can use a lot of services that allow you to download files, right? The power of Artifactory is serving the development phase. So all the CI integration, the low-level features that make Artifactory a great repository for taking files and maturing them and controlling visibility in the development phase. Once you need to get your files out, get on the CDN, get great statistics, get information which is business-oriented, then Bintray comes to the picture, and this is why we created a flow from Artifactory to Bintray so you can automate the full process. So it's true that they have some commonality, but at the end of the day, they serve a complete different need.
So it's just about selecting the best tool to the job.
Mm-hmm.
And here's another one. I'm pretty sure that answer is yes, but still, can a user without Bintray account download from private repository?
Yes. This is not, a serious answer is that the fact that we have the fact that you can hand off a signed URL to a user. This is a feature which the reason we showed it in the demo is that this is one of the most used features in Bintray, because it basically allows you to wrap any UI around Bintray and manage entitlements. We have coming up entitlement management, by the way, which is not which allows you not to query your systems for entitlement, but to replicate entitlements to Bintray from your system, including expiring entitlements. But even with just assigned URLs, it's very, very easy to get and to give anonymous users or users that for Bintray are anonymous the information. And in the log files, I didn't show it, but in the log files, you will see the applicative, the callback ID that I showed earlier. You will see it in the log files. Yeah,
so we have a question about that, about how we use this information, this ID. So the question is, what are the other means of notification besides email and this web service that you used? SMS maybe?
Okay, so for sending SMS, you can potentially use webhooks. Many SMS services have this feature, as well as email, by the way. A lot of SMS services know how to monitor an email account and trigger an SMS. But the easiest is to bundle it with the webhook API. Yeah.
So actually, Webhook API can allow you to implement any kind of notification.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and here is another question: Can user management be integrated with Atlassian Crowd?
That's an interesting question. So, yeah, like I said, this is coming up as part of our next entitlement management in the roadmap. So part of what an entitlement will allow you is to have a callback. So entitlement in the new entitlement system that we are going to introduce, you're going to be able to trigger a query to an external system from Bintray, and based on the response, which you would also be able to cache, you would be able to integrate with external resources that are queryable.
So it's a little bit like the real user plugins in Artifactory for whoever is familiar with it.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And so here is another question. I think that's the last one that we have at the moment. Can you please explain the difference between the repository and the package? Because those two seem to overlap.
Okay. Yeah, the easiest would be to share my screen again, so I'm going to do that. Okay. And I'm going to go to the Bintray user manual. Let me just see if I can quickly find this diagram. Okay. So I think this diagram explains best the arrangement in Bintray. So on the left side, you have the UI of Bintray, kind of. So there are packages. In packages, you have versions, and basically, when you upload a file, you always upload it in the context of a version. And this is like a metadata. When you every file is at the end of the day is laid out in a repository. On the right side, it's the regular repository file system-like repository. But in Bintray, every file that you upload to a repository also have metadata about which package and which version this file belongs to. If you don't have any system that has real concept of packages and versioning, you can just take a default package and an unspecified version, for example. So Docker, for example, does that. It doesn't have the notion of the files in Docker, for example. There are images that cannot be one-to-one attributed to a version or a package. But I hope it explains it. But it's important to remember just that packages and versions are very important metadata. You can have release notes on that, README files on them, notifications on new versions, ordering of versions in order to get the latest version, which is up to you to do using the REST API of Bintray. So these are just metadata about collections of files in the plain file system.
So repository, it's like the real file system, and packages and versions are kind of a virtual way to set up files inside this repository.
They are just metadata about when you upload to a path.
Yeah.
There is nothing new about that. But you specify as part of the upload, this file belongs to which version and under which package. And that gives you a lot of power when you need to manage permissions and you need to manage metadata, which for a human being, you don't think of a release as a collection of files. Those are the technical entities that make up a release. But when you speak about a release, you speak about a version, you speak about the issues that were changed in this version, you speak about what's new, and yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much for being with us, and see you in the next JFrog webinars about Artifactory and Bintray. Thank you very much again, and have a great time.